Hello, everybody. Welcome back to vBrownBag. Tonight, we are wrapping up our NSX-T series with Britton Johnson and everything old is new again. We're going to talk about getting off of NSX-V for NSX-T with a migration coordinator. But before we get to that, a few housekeeping notes. We are doing this show live on a Wednesday. That's our time, 7:30 p.m. Central every Wednesday. We have other times and other shows in other regions. If you want to register to join us live, go check out vbrownbag.com/brownbags. Check out the vBrownBag that meets your region. And that is a note for the YouTube audience. Those of you joining us live, did you know we have a YouTube channel? We sure do. It's on youtube.com/vBrownBag. All of our past content, all our past presentations are up there available for your viewing. There are over 2,000 of them. So lots of great content for you to catch up on there. If you're watching this live, you want to join in the conversation, please feel free, use the Zoom chat or Q&A, or you can even tweet us using the hashtag vBrownBag. I'll be checking that out, making sure to keep up with it, and pass any questions you have along to our presenter, who tonight is once again the wonderful Britton Johnson at VCIXNV on Twitter. Say hello, Britton.
Hey, how are you, Ken?
I'm doing well. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks for doing the series. I'm really excited to have it. It's been great. Great content to have up on the YouTubes and for our live audience. I'm going to go and hand it over to you now. So let me hit the stop share button and let you take it away.
Let me get started here.
All right.
Okay. I really dislike the way when you start a slideshow, that you can't start Zoom or share your Zoom easily. All right, I think we got the right one.
It's a lot of fun, isn't it? Yeah. Trying to get the Zoom to work while you're full screen.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get my clicker working too. I got so much junk to do. Where did that? Okay. Fun. I think we're started. I think we're ready.
I see your disclaimer slide, so I think we're good.
Good. Well, welcome to the party to end all parties of this year's vBrownBag NSX-T series. This has been yet another educational and infotainmentable. I'm gonna make up a word. Infotainmentable. There you go. Series for this year. Ken, thanks for working with me again on this. This has been a fun collaboration project.
Well, you're quite welcome. It was very entertainment-ing.
Yeah. And, we have some, of course, live people in attendance on the Zoom, and I actually have live people in attendance in my office tonight. So this will be a fun show.
Hello, audience.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's enough time over the disclaimer slide. So I'm just going to mosey on here. All right. First thing I wanted to kind of get out the cat out the bag on this. This is a V to T migration strategy session. This presentation, as I have tried to put it together, is not meant to be an answer to all V to T migration scenarios. As many of us who worked in IT for any amount of time knows, there is no one size fits all approach to really anything in IT. The goal for the talk is really to get customers thinking about migrating and ultimately contacting your VMware account team to set up a conversation with them to get your specific migration project off the ground. VMware is providing a lot of different resources and services to help customers get migrated. So please reach out today to your team if you haven't already gotten started. Just as a quick little general reminder, NSX for vSphere general support is cutting off and ending as of January 16th, 2022. That is a few short months away. So that's my personal little disclaimer at the beginning before I get jumping into this. Who am I? Hopefully you guys everybody knows who I am by now, but I'm Britton Johnson. I'm an NSX-SE or VCNSE covering healthcare. And I podcast things. I occasionally post some stuff on Twitter, not very often, but and I have a bunch of random vSphere VMware certifications. I had this crazy idea pop into my head this week that maybe I should actually try to put together a VCDX defense, but boy, I'm just not sure yet.
You are wild and crazy.
Yeah. So agenda for the series again. We've gone through some really good stuff throughout this whole process this year. Good NSX-T update, the ATP Advanced Threat Protection series, and the design session last time, where I actually made Ken do some work. So all of these are, I felt like were really good content. And then I think today should be a good one as well for the VDT migration as we round out the series for 2021. As with all times that I do this, so here's my learning resources slide. Still going to once and forever always refer back to the original series that Ken and I did last year, Deep in the Heart of COVID, as I like to refer to it. There's still tons and tons of good information in there. I still get good positive feedback from people who are thousands of people who have viewed them, and people who are using it for their certification journey and all kinds of good things. So this whole series is meant to be an addendum to that original series. Other good resources for migration specifically, always check out the NSX Tech Zone, and there is a whole migration path area on the NSX Tech Zone of ways and strategies and things that a lot of the stuff we'll cover through tonight. Again, this is not going to be an exhaustive presentation tonight, but we're going to cover kind of the highlights of stuff. Did find this week as well. There's a lot of just these good ebook resources that the VMware, and networking security business unit pumps out for good resource information like this. So that you can certainly go out and register yourself to get a free copy of this Migrate to VMware NSX-T ebook. It's almost like a 200-page book. So it's got like really, really, really good detailed information on how to do the process, things to consider, all that kind of stuff. Go get that if you need some good reading. Also, again, this is not going to be an exhaustive presentation, so I'm not going to get into the third-party partner migration tools that are out there. Just know that they do exist, and they are certainly another option if you're in a scenario where maybe again, one size doesn't fit all. Maybe our migration coordinator won't do all the things that you need it to for your specific migration. That's why there are partner tools out there to do other things that we can't, at least not yet. And so that's why they are there and why they are partners. Okay, I think that's enough of an introduction. Ken, did I miss anything?
Very thorough attainment.
I'm going to take that as a no.
No, that was a no. I don't think you missed anything.
I like to ask you questions because that gives me time to take a drink. So.
Oh, then very good then.
Yeah. All right. How did we get here? So, this is my take, my own personal take on how we got to this point of NSX as a product from vSphere to NSX-T. So this is, if anybody in marketing is watching this, this is not, anything that corporately from VMware stance. This is not necessarily the story, but this is my version of it. After a few successful years with NSX for vSphere, it became very clear that the tight interlock between NSX and vSphere as the platform that vSphere is was not necessarily enabling NSX to be adopted on a wider front. So it wasn't able to easily connect out to public clouds. It limited us to vSphere only platforms, so we couldn't connect to other hypervisors. There was just kind of a, because it was so locked into one way of doing things, it made it difficult to do other types of services and products and things that we wanted to connect to and offer protection and services for. So VMware had to pivot away from being integrated exclusively with vSphere and move to a product that would allow greater flexibility and deployment for public clouds, and also enable it to work more seamlessly for dedicated networking teams who don't have experience with vSphere. I ran into that a lot as a consultant, where I'd talk to these networking teams who were trying to work with NSX for vSphere, and they're just like, we've never once logged into vCenter, so we don't know how to do anything in vSphere. And now we have to do this networking stuff in vSphere. So how do we do this? So that was a big driver into why NSX-T became a thing, was just because there's a lot of networking people who don't do anything in virtualization products, who didn't know how to do anything in a vCenter. Now all of a sudden they're trying to do networking things in a virtualization space. And then of course the vSphere admins were a little bit, cautious and leery of giving network people access into their environment. So So all of that turns into, we built NSX-T. It has a separate detached interface from vSphere. But, as with all things, keep an eye for the future. There may be some other integrations coming with NSX-T. Aha. And vSphere. So that is how we got here. This is where we are. We're moving from vSphere to NSX-T. Let's get this party started. Okay, so as we roll into this, moving from NSX to vSphere, there's a few things that we got to consider as we roll through this. And the journey from NSX, for vSphere to NSX-T data center requires a lot of careful planning and preparation. You need to be familiar with NSX-T data center concepts, and the lingo, even from product to product, is a little bit different. So there's just certain things that will help you as you understand things as you go through it. And of course, the biggest way to get familiar with the product right off the bat is through education. So stuff like the vBrownBag series that we put out last year and this year is a good place to start. It's by no means an end, really, but it is kind of a place to begin your education process, to begin to get familiar with the terminology of things. And then, of course, we have the full, VMware led and delivered education courses. There's education courses from other partners that are out there available. And it's just one of these areas of, especially for the teams who are going to be running this thing, training within NSX-T, just because it's different enough that you kind of need to forget what you know about NSX for vSphere and try to, it's easier to, it really is easier to start over and just kind of relearn the concepts as a new construct. It actually helps, your adoption of what it's doing in that means. So getting real training, is a kind of, really, it's step number one. Okay. Discovery. So in the discovery phase, we're analyzing, the existing NSX-V for vSphere deployment to understand use cases, existing designs and things for the networking constructs, if you're using the networking components, security services, firewall rules, things that are in existence. There are differences between how we did some security groupings in distributed firewall rules in NSX for vSphere and how they are now handled in NSX-T. So the discovery phase of this is again, very important and very much a major portion of going through the process of this migration. POC and trial. This is, it's not really, I wouldn't say that this is a requirement for a migration, but if I was an engineer working for, a customer who's using and relying on NSX, this is absolutely a step that I would take. I always tell people, like when I was first getting started with NSX, I didn't really learn and get NSX as a product until I had installed it a handful of times. It just took me, because I'm just that much of a gearhead and I have to do things with my hands and get dirty with the product. It just took a while for me to do that. NSX-T, and doing the same thing with NSX-T, the curve for me was a lot faster. And so it's, kicking the tires on it, understanding where things are, getting used to the UI and how it's laid out. All that stuff happens and it really is best done, in a POC or in some sort of a trial environment. So you're not learning on the fly. Testing in production is never really recommended. Coexisting. So, this is an optional piece of it, but it is not a terrible way to go either, because if you have the hardware, that's kind of the caveat here. If you have the hardware running NSX side by side, NSX-T side by side with V, can again give you a lot of flexibility and options to be able to understand, where things are now versus where they were. And you can kind of reference back and call back to the way things were built in NSX for vSphere. Gives you a lot of, again, places to do the old stare and compare, as one of my old bosses used to say. The last piece is actually migrating workloads from NSX-V to T, and that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road. So this is where all the magic happens. And this is where, you're going to trust that the plan that you went through got you where you needed to get to. And we'll kind of talk through the bits and steps of what that plan looks like here as we roll through this rest of this journey.
So back on the steps, Britton, question real quick. What do you see more often in terms of the coexist step? People either choosing to run the both side by side, or people choosing to go directly from V to T? And what kind of gotchas do you see in either of those situations?
So I see there's no simple answer to that, Ken. There really is. It is a mixed bag because across all of the, I don't know, 50 or so customers that I cover, it's a mixed bag. And depending upon their deployment of what they're using, I mean, there's some of the deployments, like in earlier versions of Cloud Foundation and VVDs, it's by design to have both side by side. So it just depends, really. I hate that answer, but in organizations that have the ability to do both, they seem to be able to do both to some degree, so that they can kind of cut things over. But I think the ones that I've seen where it's been most successful are the organizations who go through a planning process like we're going to walk through, define clear and set schedules and migration goals, and just do a direct cutover and just build the platform, move the workloads, cut the old one off, and be done with it. So it's been, those are the ones that I've seen them be the most successful, where they just say we're doing this. This is where it's going. We're not going back, and we're moving forward. All right. So 3 critical components: config, data plane, workload. These are the things that really you have to, that make up sort of the NSX-T V to T migration components. And a lot of this stuff, if you watch back on the YouTube's one episode prior to this one, where we talked about the NSX-T design framework, I think that actually will help in establishing the workflow for an NSX-T migration, because ultimately the same kind of rules apply. Where Ken, do you remember the 4 things that we had to identify? I'm going to quiz you on this.
There were risks, assumptions.
That's 2.
Constraints.
That's 3.
Requirements.
You got it.
Man, I'm good.
Did you cheat?
All my life.
Yes. You have to identify the constraints, requirements, assumptions, and the risks. And that's just sort of the repeated process of what we do as we go through projects. And everybody who works in IT rolls through that at some level or another. And if you're getting into, architectural and design type IT roles, that's basically your day every day. And it's the same kind of deal in this process. So, as the slide illustrates, each section has a different potential tool set that can be used or decision points to make. In each one of these sections, we're going to look at specific areas. So, in the config section, maybe the migration coordinator is the thing that will work the best to move the config over. But maybe there are portions of your config in NSX or vSphere that are custom that can't be moved by the migration coordinator. And so you have to use something like custom scripts or third-party tools. And so it's the same kind of thing where, you're going to have to identify those constraints and assumptions and requirements and risks so that you can actually get through these steps to get this thing migrated over from one place to the other. And these are sort of the 3 pillars that make up what this migration looks like. And each one of these pillars requires a specific set of analysis and a sort of decision tree on how best to perform the migration. And as with, then again, and if there's a repeating theme with this talk tonight, as with all things, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. All right, migration approaches. It's going to start kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit. I'm just going to build these out because otherwise I forget to click. All right. So first, we're going to look at is the coexistence approach. And so this is, from a high level, what we're talking about here really is, you've got two distinct environments. With where you can stand up a new NSX-T environment. And you can stand up your legacy NSX for vSphere environment. The way this works best, and the way they kind of have termed this, is for if we have workloads that are like cattle, where they're short-lived, or the lifespan on them has a set end, and that at some point you're going to vacate those workloads. Either their lifespan will just be done and they can go away, and then anything new that you stand up just gets automatically. Anything new you stand up just automatically gets added into the new NSX-T environment, and then eventually, once the old environment is drained out of all of its workloads, it can just go away. That's where we've seen kind of those types of coexistence migrations work. But again, I think if you're doing this particular method, you probably need to have already started on this by now. For most organizations that are watching this as this video is live or published, with only a few months remaining of support, if you haven't already started this journey where you're moving stuff into the new NSX-T environment, it might, depending upon your organization, it might be a little bit too late. But in general, that's the coexistence idea, where if you have the time and you have a defined type of workload that can, die out and let you put new stuff in the new environment, that's where that tends to work. All right. The next one is lift and shift. So this is where, you've got workloads that, are more like, instead of cattle, they're pets. And these are the things that you love, and they're cuddly, and you want to keep them forever. And so these kind of workloads, this is where you're going to have to stand up again, greenfield. We're talking, new hardware, and you're going to migrate, over the config piece, and you're going to migrate over the workloads. And then, you can, in some cases, you're able to do this, in parallel and with existing hardware. And it's really just a matter of picking a means of getting there via some sort of a bridge, or using another tool like HCX. And I'll dive more into HCX in a minute. But realistically, we can share the management and the edge in a centralized cluster of hosts to limit the amount of resource constraint that happens when you're doing this. So we'll look at a diagram for that here in a second. But this is probably I would say probably the most used methodology is just standing up a new greenfield environment for NSX-T, moving stuff into it, and then retiring the old stuff as you kind of get it down, the old take one down, pass it around routine. All right, last one, just cut it over. Fully automated InPlace migration. So this is where, on the same hardware that the workload is on, so the workload doesn't really have to move in this scenario, but you can take an outage for the workload. That's where this kind of tends to work. So this is same hardware. We remove the bits. It's fully automatically done by the migration coordinator. The workload goes down for the time period of where the connectivity switches over. The NSX for vSphere bits get removed. Host is removed from an NSX for vSphere prepped environment cluster. It's added into an NSX-T cluster. The NSX-T bits get put on it, and then suddenly it's an NSX-T transport node. And so now we can use it within the NSX-T environment, and things just move without actually moving. So that's, I would say probably there might be, if there's like 95% of workloads are doing, this sort of lift and shift methodology, probably 1% to 2%, I think, are doing the in-place fully automated, because nobody wants their workloads down really for any amount of time. All right. So this is kind of a quick look at what a coexistence environment would look like if you're standing these things up and working towards slowly moving things over. We've got the legacy, vSphere compute and edge clusters, your edge services gateways, your distributed logical routers. Their workloads are here. The hosts prepped for V. They have the NSX controllers and the NSX manager in the management cluster. So if we have space inside of that management cluster, then we can deploy, the NSX manager and its controlling pieces, which are all really one piece in NSX-T versus how things were split up in NSX for vSphere. And then that kind of gives us some flexibility then to bridge the same vCenter into the new NSX, and then start to get to the point where we can stand up new workloads inside the compute cluster on the NSX-T cluster side. And then again, as your workloads age out, or as they can be turned off and cold migrated over, that's a possibility. Then it's just a matter of updating BGP peering for the networks that are coming over, so that they know where to go for the new things as they turn up. So we got a couple of different scenarios for the lift and shift migration type here. So this is lift and shift cold. It can be done manually a little bit in this method, unless you're using the migration coordinator, where then everything can be done fully automated. But everything kind of needs to be pre-built on the greenfield sides, that you have a place to go to, and then the workloads get shut down and they get pulled over. So NSX, we read the topology out of the vSphere manager with, again, either scripts, third-party tools, or NSX migration coordinator. The topology gets built from that information within the environment. So we're standing up, routing, firewalling, all the various policies, and then when it's ready, the workload moves over. And then it's just a matter of having routes updated and all that on the subnets, and so the workloads actually have connectivity once they are migrated over. Lift and shift 2. So this is similar to the cold, but it's done with an NSX-T bridge of some sort. So again, multiple ways to kind of look at this. So here we're going to utilize a layer 2 edge bridge appliance to extend things over. So we're going to read the topology with either our scripts or third-party tools or the migration coordinator, create the topology in NSX-T. We'll use a NSX-T edge bridge appliance. So that is a standalone appliance that gets deployed on the vSphere side. So this is just a simple OVA that deploys into the vSphere side with information from the NSX-T side. It extends a layer 2 network. So that logical switch that exists on the V side gets extended into the T side. And then, at such point that you are ready to move things over, we just move the gateway. And then our workloads can come over. And then at such point that we no longer need that bridge, we can tear it down. And then the workloads are done. The other piece of this is, because this is a stateful migration, and it's and it can be done live or cold. In this methodology, the firewall state for the workload, it gets migrated from the vSphere distributed firewall to the NSX-T distributed firewall on the side. So we're going to keep the security topology in place, because we're configuring it before we get there, and then allowing it to move over in a smooth manner.
So Britton, I noticed one thing on that last slide. You're calling out a specific version of NSX-V that they should be moving from. Is there a specific version, or minimum version of NSX-T for this migration?
There's not necessarily a minimum version. This is, whenever they set up this particular slide deck, that may have been the version that was available at the time for NSX for vSphere. Pretty much, if you're doing any sort of migration today, you're going to want to be on at 6.4.4 as it would be one of the minimum ones to do some of this stuff. If you're going in, the thing to check when you're doing these upgrades and migrations is the interoperability matrix on the website, because that will tell you all of the specific versions you need to be at based on your vSphere level, based on the NSX you're coming from and going to. All of those things need to be double checked and triple checked with the interoperability matrix.
Yeah, that's a good call out, because who knows when folks are going to see this video, right?
Right, exactly.
I guess my only other follow-up question would be then, does it matter on the destination side what the underlying VDS is, whether it's NVDS or converged VDS?
So that is going to largely depend on what version of vSphere you're coming from and going to.
Okay.
So if we're going, and this is also what relates back to the version of NSX or vSphere. If you're going to vSphere 7 in this thing, you need to have at least version 6.4.6. Really recommending to go to 6.4.10, the latest release as of this time, because 6.4.6 was the minimum one that understood the vSphere 7 distributed switch construct. Prior to that, the NSX for vSphere did not understand the virtual distributed switch 7 construct. So we couldn't get there, but we had to build that into the release of NSX, so it supported it. So realistically, yes, depending on when you're watching this, of course, again, it's back to the constraints, assumptions, and risks. You cannot assume that your versions are going to be compatible while you're going through this. So you need to call those out as risks and understand what how you tear down those risks and make them, not risky anymore as you go through the process. And the version compatibility and planning and all those things is certainly required as you run through this process. But in general, the NVDS really is only, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but it really just depends on the version of vSphere level that you're going to when you get there in the destination.
Cool, thanks.
Good question, Ken.
That's what I'm here for.
All right, a little bit of a rabbit trail here. So as I promised in the description for this thing tonight, I was going to talk about migrating and also talk about HCX. So this is my HCX rabbit trail, and I will doing this for a very specific reason. But also, if you go back to the last episode from our 2020 series, I did more of a deeper follow down, not really a deep dive, but more of a deep introduction into HCX and what that is. So you can always go back to that. But HCX is what it is for the uninitiated. It is the hybrid cloud extension add-in component for NSX. So it's really a additional product that bolts onto NSX, kind of like vRealize Network Insight, where it does specific things and adds functionality to NSX that NSX doesn't have natively. For customers who are doing any sort of workload mobility and migration, HCX is our go-to thing for how to do that. The big deal and reason for this is the idea is it abstracts away the data center from the workload so that the workloads can just pick up and move and go where they need to go. Be that from a legacy vSphere platform into a modern platform like Cloud Foundation or VMC and AWS, or any of the hyperscalers as well that support it. So when we talk about doing an NSX-V to T migration, HCX comes up a lot because it's a simple way for customers who already have NSX Enterprise Plus licensing to take advantage of a tool that they already own. So they can pick up and move things with HCX and get the migration done again with something that they don't have to buy any additional licensing for. It's built into the NSX Enterprise Plus, and so they can just turn on the services, and it makes really just the migration of the workloads piece that much easier as they go through the process of doing that. So that's kind of my aside with this. And as we have grown HCX and even just this year, most of these updates from 4.0 to 4.2, which was released just August of 2021, has added on, some fairly significant updates and functionality and things where we're adding in, predictive estimates for migrating workloads, so you can really see, how long it's going to take to move your workload, and give you sort of that real-time feedback, so because that's kind of the biggest question of, I'm moving this, X number of, gigabyte or terabyte workload. How long is it going to take me to get from site A to site B? And that's something we've been really working hard at to build into the product, so we can give teams the estimation so they can do proper planning and do migrations in a seamless method. and of course, as all things VMware, watch the future space because like all of our stuff, it just keeps getting better and better and better. So that's my slight aside for HCX. Here, from a topology view, is what a lift and shift migration with HCX looks like. So again, very similar in the beginning part. We're reading the topology, we're creating the topology in the destination, but as part of that destination build out, we're going to deploy the HCX managers on the source destination. And then out of that, we deploy then the HCX interconnect appliances. And then out of that, we also then connect in the HCX network extension appliances. The HCX network extension, as is noted here, does stretch or stitch together the layer 2 networks from source to destination so that you can move workloads back and forth and get things synced over. And again, this opens up all of the migration capabilities that HCX has, be it live or cold or zero downtime with replication assisted vMotions. So, and the last piece of it still is, once you're done with it and you've moved your gateway into the NSX-T domain on the destination side, you can move all that stuff through. And again, there are version things to look at when it comes to this kind of stuff as well. But generally speaking, the NSX version doesn't matter as much with HCX because HCX is going to handle all the work of actually moving the workload. So it's, HCX is designed to kind of mask the source side away from the destination side. So the workload doesn't really even understand that it's going to something new. It just, wakes up one day and it's on a new host. And so the workload kind of gets, shadow obfuscated away from where the host that it's on, and then all of a sudden it's on a new host. It's quite interesting how that happens, but that's a story for another day.
So Britton, it looks to me like one of the big takeaways would be for customers to be aware that until that all those segments and their gateways are migrated over, 2 VMs on the same host but on different segments could experience like some kind of like exit of the host for routing, right? That
right.
NSX
So
is great
that's
at avoiding, but in this migration scenario, the interim, they might be subject to that kind of behavior.
Yeah, that's typical for really any of these migration scenarios where, when the gateway exists on the destination side or on the source side, and you need to get it to the destination side. Just because we're stretching that network over, the gateway's, still sitting over here until you get to the point where you are actually cutting it over and having the gateway move, which is represented by this line, really, in this example. And so that the gateway move process where, you're going to have to then, the BGP peers at the top are going to have to understand and realize, oh, that network isn't over here anymore. Now it's over here. So, plan accordingly. Again, that's a risk, for a customer environment because, not all BGP networks update at the same speed. And so in general, there is going to be some potential for downtime, and most likely some sort of a network outage, be it a few seconds or maybe a minute. Again, if you're moving and migrating workloads in this process across the country or on the other side of the world, you're going to have to plan accordingly. But the most common thing where I see this kind of a use case is intra data center, where really you're going from rack to rack. And you just don't want to, build up the bridge of connecting vCenters together and doing all that sort of stuff. You're just standing up net new, old vCenter to new vCenter, and you want HCX to handle all the migrations and plan all that things out and do all the good things that HCX does. All right. InPlace end-to-end. So the big deal to pay attention on this one, if my pen will work, is that one. The only certain prescriptive network topologies are supported for this end-to-end in-place migration. So this is the migration scenario where the workloads don't really move. We're just converting the host as it is from an NSX or a vSphere host to an NSX-T host. So in this, again, we're going to read the configuration and start building things out from the manager side. We're going to uninstall the NSX for vSphere VIBs, install the NSX-T kernel modules, stand up the VDS, connect it to the hardware and build the environment out. And at that point, it stops being an NSX for vSphere host and moves into an NSX-T host. And all the while, your workloads didn't go anywhere. So again, needs to be fully supported in the way that the way that your networks work and the way that your workloads can support it. There's lots of risk involved here for workloads, because they need, your application teams have to be okay with the workload being offline for a period of time while the host transitions, and it's it's one of those ones where if you can do it, a good way to do it because it just gets it done. But at the same point, you need to make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's in the planning process. So that's. All right. Wow, are we 40 minutes in already? Holy cow. All right, so this is my demo portion. So let me walk through this quick. The migration coordinator for getting this stuff set up. Let me pop over to my live environment here. So when you install NSX Manager in an environment, by default, you have options that are not turned on because you may not necessarily need to be doing a migration. So by default, we do not enable the migration coordinator services within the NSX Manager itself. So when you log into NSX Manager, you go to System, you go to Migrate. You will get a note that the migration service is not running, and to start it, you need to run this particular command. So let's take a look at running that process quick. It's really quick and easy.
You didn't tell me it was going to be a live demo. This is exciting.
All right. So, it's fairly straightforward as long as I can type correctly with all of my stuff strewn all over my desk.
No promises.
And I'm waiting for tab completion. There it is. So that's it. I mean, it's really just starting. You're just turning on the service that was not enabled by default and submit. And once that fully turns itself on, there we go. Refresh. And this is something that, I mean, even if you wanted to just use, I'll go through this in a second, but if you just wanted to stand up one NSX-T manager in your environment, point it at your existing vCenter and do a migration assessment. So that is where migration coordinator looks at the vSphere environment and looks at the things that are installed in there and basically tells you what can and cannot be migrated. We can do that in a non-destructive and non-interruptive way. So this is just, that's all this environment really is just one single NSX manager with an NSX for vSphere. So, as soon as the service is available, you see the options available to you. And then it's really just a matter of walking through the steps and getting your environment stood up. I'm not going to run through a full process of this because I've not prepped for that, but I will walk through what it looks like in my slides because that's going to be a little bit faster. So that's how you start the migration coordinator, and that's how you get to this process of using it for these end-to-end migration use cases. So it's built in. It involves minimal downtime. It allows for in-place upgrades. It's fully automated. It allows for do-it-yourself migration process. It gives you a distinct upgrade workflow. It does the pre-flight checks. You understand who and what you can migrate. Gives you a topology view of what things are going to look like once it's done. And the most important piece is it's fully supported by GSS. So if at any point you have a problem doing this migration, using the migration coordinator, you can always open up a support ticket and someone from VMware will help you. All right. So again, the stages of the migration coordinator. So once we point it at the NSX destination or the source side, the original NSX or vSphere piece, we're going to look through that environment, understand what's involved in that, and then start to build our pre-migration configuration report. And it's going to tell what can and cannot be migrated, give you a list of things to work on and potentially clean up in that old environment. It'll do the configuration migration, it'll do the edge migration, it'll do the host migration, and all of this stuff in the end-to-end scenario here, you can do kind of up to this point without disruption to the environment. But for safekeeping, really, I kind of just tell people to stop here. You're right at this pre-migration configuration step, because it's pretty easy to click a button on this side of the config migration piece and start to actually move things over when you're not ready to. So make sure that, if you just wanted to do the assessment, you just walk through the couple of first steps of what the migration looks like, and don't click on anything that's looking like it's going to execute and start to move your actual configuration over, because that's where you start to cross into the area of potential for risk for your environment. So again, call back to doing this in a POC environment first, so you understand the process and you can do things. And of course, with this as well, there are rollback options. Within the coordinator migration coordinator, user interface. So you can roll back, the edges. You can roll back the hosts, and you can get things moved back. So if there are problems, you can always step back. Let's kind of speed up a little bit here. Again, in the prerequisite stage, the things that we need to pay attention to, again, we're coming from an NSX for vSphere stable environment. It needs to be patched. Again, 6.4.6 really is probably recommended or later. The NSX-V manager needs to be in a standalone role. So if you're using any sort of cross vCenter NSX for vSphere environment, or using, the old NSX multi-site topologies with NSX for vSphere, where you had primary and secondary managers where things were replicating between two sites. As of today, secondary sites cannot be connected. So you can have a primary NSX manager turned on, but you can't have a secondary connected to it if you were using the cross vCenter NSX topologies. So, again, those are the territories where we enter some more custom migration scenarios that the migration coordinator is not at this point prepared to deal with. So if you're using this just in a single site, we're a standalone mode. We've got it covered, no problem. Again, on the vSphere side, we can't have any pending host reboots, and we're going to go backwards to vSphere 6.5 as well from an NSX-T compatibility standpoint. And really realistically as well too, depending upon the migration scenario you're working through, this might be kind of a duh, but available capacity to put hosts in maintenance mode so you can do VD virtual distributed switch transitions on them is also a risk or a caveat to the process to make sure you have that in place. That extra capacity is good to do. Again, then also we have done, part of the prerequisites, we have to have the NSX-T management cluster stood up, edge nodes deployed, and things for those edge functions to get migrated to. And then, any of those independent edges deployed via the standalone edges deployed via an OVA are not handled via the NSX UI. So those are those standalone pieces to do, like the layer 2 extension. So yeah, step 2 in the migration coordinator. So this is the part where, yeah, we've connected it to the vSphere, has imported information over. Now we're resolving conflicts within the migration configuration itself. So once we've read what that environment looks like, we'll then kick out a thing of, here's some things to be considered. So there are certain things which will require action. There are certain things where we're just going to call out risk, and there are things where we're just going to say you're good to go. And so, as with all types of things in migrations, you have to clear this list of risks before we'll let you continue and move on. And there will be actions that you have to select and things that you have to do, questions and decisions you have to make as you work through the process to clear this thing out. And this is kind of the non-impactful part of it where, it's read the configuration, it's understood, what you're trying to do and telling you where you need to go. So this would be what the assessment view looks like if you were just doing this in an assessment mode. And then finally, we get to the actual migrate configuration stage. So, you've read the configuration, you've resolved any potential conflicts and configuration issues within the environment. And now you're, gone ahead and pushed the configuration from the NSX for vSphere environment into the NSX-T. And that's kind of the piece of that. So kind of the other networky piece to this thing is, of course, migrating edges. If you're using, edge services gateways or the DLR, you've got, likely equal cost multipath routed gateways at the top of rack in a virtual stance. And that's what's peering to your top of rack BGP, physical infrastructure. How do we get those things moved over? So really, it's the migration coordinator doing its job to pre-configure that environment as it moves things over. North-south traffic will be interrupted during an edge migration. So again, that is a risk that you're going to have to call out as you go through this process. And then the workloads they're going to continue to be running and need to be accessed. We're going to have to swing those things over and swing the gateways over. Allow time again for the BGP peering to understand where the network is now, so that it can move things over. Or even in a scenario, if you're using new IP addresses, those things need to be learned within your environment as well. So there's time and constraints and things to figure the time it takes for those networks to go live. So again, lots of moving parts and pieces to these things, and depending upon what level of deployment you are will determine kind of the complexity thing is where things need to go. And of course, you can do the edge migration rollback as a function as well. All right. Here's sort of the VDS or distributed switch bits that you're interested in, Ken.
Super interested. Super duper.
Okay. So for an in-place migration, again, the hosts, the VM stays in place on the host. The VIBs, get pulled out, and the distributed firewall rules, will stay in place at this juncture. So once we remove the NSX for vSphere VIBs, we install the NSX-T VIBs, we create a new NSX virtual distributed switch for each VDS that's involved. So again, this is prior to vSphere 7 with the virtual distributed switch 7. So we're going to stand up a new NVDS for each vSphere 6, I'll call it, virtual distributed switch that's in the environment. We'll migrate those NICs over to the NVDS, and we will remove the old VDS from the environment. So that is fully automated. That's how the process works. And it's what happens when you do this in-place migration to step things over. So that's the legacy way, I'll call it, with the non-VDS7. So with VDS7, in a maintenance mode, again, fully automated, we're talking host 1, host 2 here. You're going to evacuate the host, remove the NSX for vSphere VIBs, install the NSX-T VIBs, without VDS7. Each VDS gets an NVDS. The NICs move over. workloads move back, and then we can do the same thing on the other one. Now, on the, let me go back here. With the VDS7, similar process, except, we will, migrate the VMs, evacuate the host, remove the NSX for vSphere VIBs, install NSX-T, configure the existing VDS7 for NSX-T. That happens as part of the process of preparing the host. So basically, NSX-T just owns the VDS that's there. And then we can migrate those VMs back over and complete the process on the other host. So as you can see, it's pretty clear to see, if you're on vSphere 7, that's the recommended path. Get to vSphere 7 as quickly as possible, really before you get to NSX-T, because it really just makes the overall migration path and process much, much more simpler. Because ultimately, if you're going back to this step where you're moving things to an NVDS, you're setting yourself up for a two-step move, because the NVDS is a construct that is going to be end of life at some point. It's for if you're stuck on vSphere 6.5, 6.7 for the time period that you're in, hopefully you're on your way out of that. But if you're stuck there and this is the only way to do it, you're going to have to do a leapfrog migration with NSX again at some point, where you're going to have to move those workloads to a vSphere 7 backed distributed switch. So that's why it's advantageous to do the vSphere 7 move first to get there. All right, a couple minutes left here while I wrap this up. So lightning round topology review, let's call this. So this topology contains, a distributed logical router pairing with an edge services gateway. ECMP is not configured. The edge services gateways are in a high available configuration. BGP or static routing gets configured between the ESGs and the northbound top of rack. An edge service gateway can be running, layer 4 to layer 7 services. And then after the migration, the configuration gets replaced with a tier 0 gateway, the tier 0 service router, the part that actually runs stateful services within NSX-T, gets deployed in there as well. And then we can start to move, workloads over and have them exist on similar network platforms, because again, we've read the configuration, copied it over, pushed it into the new environment, and moved things over. So it's, if you have a topology that looks like this, this is sort of how we then split it out on the other side with this, so we go from a pair of ESGs and a DLR to a pair of edge nodes and a tier 0. And that's how we get there with that particular review. So ESGs configured with ECMP, this is kind of what it looks like, where, BGP, again, is configured between the edge services gateways and the northbound routers. The edge services gateways must be configured with the same, BGP neighbors. The services gateways can point to the same autonomous system. If BGP, is configured between the DLR and the edge services gateway, all those BGP neighbors on the DLR must have the same weight. Otherwise, we can have some networks, taking over things. And then that's, as you're standing this sort of topology up, especially if you're doing this side by side, you don't want to be standing up something that's going to start stealing your routes and in the process of you building this thing out until you're actually ready to start migrating those workloads over. And again, it's the same process we've been talking through the whole time. We read the configuration, we push it over, we build it out. So again, you run off with, a pair of ESGs in ECMP mode, a single DLR, go to a pair of edge nodes with services and a single tier 0. So this is sort of our workhorse configuration where we're doing, a pair of edge nodes to do the physical bridging, and then moving everything into a single logical distributed tier 0 routing construct within the software defined network that is NSX-T. Last couple ones here, and we're trying to speed through and wrap this up. So this one, really the only real difference here is if you're doing this in kind of a multi-tier network methodology, we're still going from, a pair of ESGs and a pair of, down to a secondary pair of ESGs, which are running for highly available stable services. Really it's kind of this very similar scenario again, pair of edge nodes, service routers, single tier 0, but now we're running this down to a tier 1. So this is how we can get to, multi-tenant type operations. So if you needed to have multiple tier 1s underneath the tier 0, you can kind of build this will be like the core configuration to get you to that step. But it enables that kind of second level of networking within the environment, so you can scale things out if you're in an environment that requires massive network scale. All right. So this is where we're doing load balancing stateful services within the environment on top of the tier 1 gate or tier one router within inside of the NSX-T environment. So we're going to pull over some of those services from the NSX for vSphere ESGs. So those ESG stable services like load balancing can get pulled over to a stateful appliance that lives inside of the NSX-T environment. This one I think is probably my favorite of the scenarios because it's the simplest of all of them. So we're not doing any networking within the software-defined networking components of NSX. We're doing just straight distributed firewall, micro segmentation and security. If you were not using this before an NSX for vSphere, this is the thing all NSX-T customers need to be doing. It's just simply enabling security for their existing networks. We don't have to go through this methodology of re-architecting all your physical network and routing and all that stuff into software-defined network layers. We can just sit on top of your workloads and put firewalls on all your workloads directly without having to go through the effort of re-architecting and rechanging and remapping all of your networks out. This is probably the simplest real method where, again, we're going to read the configuration, understand the distributed firewalling policy for your VLAN-backed networks. The VLAN-backed networks are going to exist on the source and destination because usually they're on the same physical network. It's really just a matter of NSX Manager reading the host configuration, understanding your groups, your IP segments, how your rules are getting applied, and pushing them over statefully so that you can move things over and have the workload security state move with the workload from V to T. It's pretty slick the way this happens, so that you can have really a kind of a vMotion event where you go from one place to the next and have your workload security follow with it. That to me is one of the more beneficial approaches of doing this, especially if you're trying to do this without downtime. If you don't have to move networks around, if you just want to obtain security, this is the kind of the way that I like to walk through it. Let's see, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to look at one other thing if there's any piece of this that I need to really cover over. I think that really is it. The last real piece is if you're doing a lift and shift migration where you're just doing distributed firewalling only, and you're not doing any of the networking components. There is the same basic walkthrough method flow for the prereqs, the migration, the config. And again, you can do this non-disruptive assessment piece of the product so that you can understand, where things are going from and to. And it's, going from a stable environment in NSX for vSphere to the stable environment in NSX-T. We'll read the configuration, pull over the rules that we are able to migrate and get them deployed in a way that makes sense for the NSX-T environment. We'll copy over the VNIs to match them up from one to the next, and so that the segments are understood within your environment as well. And it really just makes for a simple transition where you're doing the workload migration, but maintaining your security policy, which is kind of the thing that most customers are really after, is how do we do this in the simplest way possible that gets us the most security and simplicity possible. So that's sort of where we have to wrap things up. Ken, any questions that I might have missed?
Don't see any open questions right now. I'll just say one more time, thanks so much for doing this, Britton. It was awesome. Great follow-up and great stuff.
And to my live audience, Tony, what did you think?
It's good.
All right.
I did have one question.
Oh,
here we go. Another.
Oh, wow. A live question from the live audience.
Nice.
Is your new car faster than an accurate NSX?
Oh,
no, it is not.
Still
yeah.
an NSX
If you believed in it
Yeah.
so much, Britton, why didn't you buy an Acura NSX?
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's beyond my pay grade at this point. Yeah. So
what's the best resource for somebody? Obviously, you went in pretty good detail here for something as far as a migration scenario. But what do you think are the best resources out there? This is more geared towards people that already have NSX, but somebody that is a novice that doesn't know NSX very well and wants to get started, like VMware Tech Zone. Is that where you guide them, or you have a specific spot hands tabs?
This is what I do for all of my customers. Is I cheat and I point them back to last year's vBrownBag series. I don't know how many times, and this is why I have said over and over in this series that the vBrownBag team cannot delete this from YouTube because I use it all the time. I point people back there all the time because it's really the groundwork framework level without going into the full install configure manage class. I built that series to be a really Cliff Notes version of the install configure manage class, so you can get there's some really good technical details out of it without spending an entire week in a class. And so I always point people back to that. Of course, there's NSX Tech Zone. Of course, there are books, but to toot my own horn a little bit, Ken and I worked really hard, I feel like, on that original vBrownBag series and this one too. And so that's my main place that I point people back to. And I always, share it within, my own peer network circle for other NSX SEs. Like, hey, if you have customers who want technical resources, this is stuff I've done that's out there. Gotten a lot of positive feedback on it.
One correction, you worked really hard on that one, Britton. I was just the word face.
All right. Well.
And I'll tell folks that are maybe watching this, after the fact, there's more risk of that bit.ly link not working than us taking it down from YouTube. So if you can't find it, there is a playlist in the YouTube channel for vBrownBag if you want to find that 2020 series. So you don't have to go searching the entirety of vBrownBag's YouTube channel. Look for the NSX-T series.
Yeah. And hopefully they'll create another playlist for this series or just add this one to that one. But
what's preferable?
Yeah, either is fine, really, I think. But
all right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in. So that's a wrap. Thanks again, Britton, and thanks everybody who joined us. And
thank you, Ken.
We'll see you next time. There's an NSX-T update series, everyone, or before then. 2 weeks from today, I'm not sure. We got something going on tomorrow or next week, but 2 weeks from today, we're going to kick off our Kubernetes Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam series, CKA. We still have a couple open speaking slots. If you know anybody, for those of you who may be watching tonight or on YouTube later, that would be a good fit for that, please connect them with us. Let them know. Volunteer them. That's the vBrownBag way. Don't volunteer them. Volunteer them. Hey, you're presenting on vBrownBag for the CKA exam prep series. All right, that's it for now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ken.